This is Henry McCarthy coming to you from the beautiful Emory and Henry College campus, WEHC 90.7, Poets and Writers. Very privileged today to have a really good writer, an interesting personality, and a friend of mine, Mary Ann Artrip, on. So, Mary Ann, how are you today?
I'm fine, Henry. How are you?
I'm doing great, and you're down in Elizabethton, Tennessee, right?
I'm in Elizabethton. Yes, I was when I retired from where I worked in Abington. I came back to Tennessee because I grew up in Johnson City, and so I knew when I went to Virginia that one day I would return to Tennessee, and of course that's what I did.
So, we always like to ask around these mountains where you're from. So you're originally from, were you born in Johnson City?
I was not born in Johnson City, but we moved. I was born up in Dickson County. That's a lot of Artrips up in Dickson County and Buchanan County and Russell County up in there. But before I even started the first grade, we moved to Johnson City, and I stayed there, married my high school sweetheart there. That marriage didn't work out. Then some years later, I married a man from Meadowview, which is just up the road from Abington, and that marriage didn't work out either. I think marriage and I just do not get along. But I stayed in Abington because I had a job. I worked for the water department, and so I just stayed up there until I retired, and I said I'm going back to Tennessee.
Well, now, do you remember the first thing you ever wrote?
Yes, I do. It was a little poem, and I used part of it in my first book. Part of it is just so hokey that I had to leave it out, but I did do the first few lines of it in the first book that I wrote, and I was in the sixth grade, and I got a gold star for it.
Do you remember what it was about?
It was about, I always loved autumn, and it was about the leaves are falling all around, up on the houses and the ground. We rake them every windy fall. I love that season most of all.
Well, that
was my verse. And there was another stanzas to it, but it was as good as the first one, so I didn't use it. But that was the first thing I ever wrote.
Well, that's lovely. And so you went on and you began to write, and you've told us what the first thing you ever wrote, but talk a little bit about now how you got into, you worked full-time. You had a full-time job, correct?
Worked full-time. I always wanted to write. Was never much of a reader when I was in school. Reading to me was a chore, just something to write a book report on, just something that I had to read to get through. You read the first, the middle, and the end, and you write a book report. But then, as I got a little bit older, I did read more serious work. I started out by reading cozy writers like Mary Stewart, Victoria Holt, and Phyllis Whitney. Those kind of those people that wrote the English cozies, the Gothic stories. And then I sort of got away from that, and then I got into O. Henry, and O. Henry was really good, like Hitchcock, to give you a twist at the end, to catch you and give you something that you didn't expect. And I thought, yeah, that's what I want to write. That's what I want to be good enough to write, to give my readers the unexpected, not what they were looking for, but something entirely different. So that's the first book that I wrote. Remember Me with Love is Kate on the first. My main character in the first chapter is arrested for murder, and you have to wait till you get to the end to see did she do it or did she not, and that has a really big twist at the end. Had a lot of people really like that book, but that book was written. It was published back in the very late 80s or early 90s. Southwest Publishing of Arizona published that book.
And what was the title of it again, Mary Ann?
Remember Me with Love.
Oh, I like that. And you read O. Henry. And
I read O. Henry. Yes,
I
love The Last Leaf, and of course we were raised on the Magi and the Gift of the Magi.
How about The Ransom of Red Chief? Did you ever read that one?
No, I don't think so.
Well, that's where the little boy, the robbers kidnap him, and then they want to give him back.
Oh yes, I have. Yes, they want to give him back because he's so much trouble. Yeah, I do remember that. And then, so I really broke the ice with my first one. and I was quite at some age by then. Up until then, I just hadn't had the skills or the discipline to write. I always wanted to write, but I never had the discipline or the vocabulary, or I had to grow into it. Some people could pick it up early. I picked it up late.
Well, that's interesting, and we're advised to read.
And
if we want to be really good writers, we need to read. And, of course, if we want to be good writers, we need to write as well. That's very interesting. And you mentioned something about the Gothic writers. What do you mean by that?
Gothic is it's like almost writing to a pattern or to a schedule. There's always a rich damsel in distress that's going to inherit the family fortune. In fact, Moon Shadows was written on that very same pattern. That was the second book I did. I set that book around the shot tower up at Fort Chiswell.
Up at Fort Chiswell, yes, and that's on your way to Hillsville, folks out there listening today.
That's right, there on 77. Yeah, I was up there. A friend of mine took me up there. We stayed about all day, and I was up in the top. We were looking at the drop-off, and I thought, this is a wonderful place for a murder. This would just be perfect. So Moon Shadows was set around that shot tower, and it's what I would consider a cozy or a Gothic.
It's a cozy or a Gothic. So your themes, if we had to ask about themes, what basically comes up in your writing? Would it be mystery? Would that be a theme usually, or
mystery, intrigue, a little romance, a little. There's almost always a murder in my books. Lou Crabtree used to say to me, Mary Ann, wouldn't know how to begin to kill a person off. And I said, well, Lou, really, it's easy.
Lou Crabtree. Well, our listeners out there, and you're listening to Poets and Writers, WEHC 90.7. This is Henry McCarthy, and we are talking with Mary Ann Artrip today. And tell them who Lou Crabtree is for folks around the mountains here.
Lou Crabtree was one of the greatest ladies of writing. She was the most generous. In fact, I dedicated Surrey Square, my third novel, to her as the grandest lady of them all. She sat on her front porch on Valley Street, and people, writers mostly, almost always, would come by, and I would go by, just by chance, if I'd catch her on the porch, then I would stop and go up, and we would sit there and talk about writing, and then somebody else would wander by, and we didn't want to bother her if she was inside, but if she was on the porch, she didn't care to stop. And she was the Port Laureate of Virginia one year. She was on the Today Show with Jane Pauley. This was years and years ago. And she was just the most beloved person. I think that she was so generous with her time. And the first time I conspired to sit beside of her, I had gone to a Danny Marion reading at Virginia Highlands Community College, and I saw Lou sitting over by herself, and I thought, oh, good, now I've got a chance to go sit beside of her. So I did, and I sat down, and she was just really friendly, and she introduced herself, and I, of course, I knew who she was before I even sat down. And she said, "And what's your name?" And I told her, and she said, "What do you do?" And I sort of whispered and said, "I'm a writer." And she said, "Oh, that's wonderful. I love writers." She was just this great person of compliments. And so later on, I went by her house on Valley Street. The house was wonderful. It was one of these fallen down.
On Valley Street there in Abingdon, Virginia. And, she took a class, or was Lee Smith knew her, right?
Oh, yeah. She and Lee Smith were great friends. Judy Miller and Lou Crabtree and Lee Smith, they were all just really good. And I felt really blessed that I was able to know some of those people, because when Lou told me, she read some short story I'd done or something, and she said, "Mary Ann, believe me when I tell you, you really are a writer. You do have the ability to write," and I think that probably finished me off as as me convinced that I could write.
Well, I first met you at the group we get together is at the Appalachian Poets and Writers down there at the Depot.
It is. It was.
And that's been a number of years ago. Talk a little bit about some of the characters. You and I were talking the other day about Dr. Miller and Sean O'Sullivan. Some of the folks.
And then the ones that we've lost, Dr. Sam we lost, Dr. Tom Cantwell we lost, Bill Condon is gone now. But these were great. We had the best times down there sitting around those tables, critiquing each other's work, and laughed. In fact, in Moon Shadows, I had mentioned, and if you don't mind, maybe I won't even get around to reading what I was going to, but in Moon Shadows, and Rob Weisfeld put this in the this one acknowledgement in the paper about the writers group, and it's real short. It's just like 5 or 6 lines.
Sure.
I acknowledge Al Bradley because he's the one that took me to the shot tower to begin with.
Yes. Now Al Bradley was at one time was a town manager, I believe.
He was.
And
he was
then
also county administrator.
And he works with the radio. He's a graduate, I believe, of Emory and Henry. I know he works with the radio station.
Yeah, Al and I go way back. I just love him dearly, and he took me to the shot tower. And we stayed all day long, and so I had to acknowledge him for taking me there.
Well, go ahead and share what you were going to share.
And then, and also this was under the acknowledgments, and also to my little family of writers at the Arts Depot in Abington, Virginia, and those Friday nights that kept us sane through tragedy and triumph and a lot of laughter. The writings, the muse of the poetry carried us across the years, and we got older without even realizing it. Oh, the loveliness and the pain of it all.
Oh, that's beautiful. That's
what it was. We were a family, Henry.
Right.
We loved each other and got so close and helped each other with their work, and we criticized, but we criticized gently, and we just had such a good time.
Well, go ahead. But Doc Miller,
many of them are gone.
Yes, Doc Miller and Sean O'Sullivan. Sean's moved back north, but he was. How much do you know about? He'd been a Broadway producer. Is that correct? And
Sean is multi-talented. When he was 80, we had a birthday celebration for him up at Barter Stage 2 up on the bank, and we had the most wonderful time. And he did a scene from King Lear, the best I remember. But he could do the best Shakespeare. And the last time we had a Shakespeare night at Zazzy's, he did. I can't remember now which one it was. I know I did Macbeth, and he did. I can't remember. But his mind, he is 90. He's 93, 90, he's in his early 90s, and his mind is just like a steel trap. I mean, he remembers all. His body's not in very good shape, but his mind is just wonderful. And he was a Shakespearean actor. He directed Dark Shadows in New York. He was personal friends with a lot of people that were. The younger people wouldn't know him because they're older stars.
Right. Now I'm going to ask you
all those people. But yeah, he was. I just thought he was the most wonderful person in the world.
Well, now Doc Miller, talk a little bit about what you know about Doc Miller, and a lot of people around these parts know about him.
Dr. Sam was a jazz expert.
But he had been a family doctor, right?
I think he delivered everybody in Abington.
Okay.
He delivered a lot of one of my best friends in Abington. She married a boy. His middle name was Miller, after Dr. Miller, because he delivered him. But yeah, he was, and he told me one night that I hadn't been feeling well, and he mentioned something that he had noticed about me, and he said, Mary Ann, when you go back to your doctor, have him check so-and-so, because I think that's probably part of your problem. And he was one of these doctors, these old doctors that had done it for so long that they could look at you and tell you pretty much what was wrong with you. And he was right.
Well, he's a fine poet, and I came into town one time, and I picked up his book, and I didn't know who he was, but I started reading his poems and bought the book right off the shelf. So now we want to come back to you now, and we want to talk a little bit about your writing and your themes, and I bet you have some things to read there for us. Do you have a couple of selections?
I was going to
What?
I was going to read a short thing,
Sure.
if we've got the time, from Surrey Square.
Yeah.
That was my third novel, and this is about this rich lady that goes into this charity hospital.
All right, and this is from Surrey Square, you say?
Surrey Square. That's
Okay.
the name of a little backwoods town where she goes to after she goes into this charity hospital to check on this newborn baby, and then when she walks out with the baby. She steals the baby, and you don't know why.
All right.
But she's a really she's a good character, and so she ends up. She knows if she can keep the baby, she's going to have to leave the city and go to the woods, go into the back country. So she does that, and when she gets there, it's called Surrey Square,
Okay.
and she convinces everybody that she had the baby because the baby was like 4 hours old when she stole him. And when she stole him out of his crib at the hospital,
Wow.
and then she convinced everybody in Surrey Square that she had him during a snowstorm that just happened to pop up the next day. So, but there was one person in the town that knew that she had not birthed that baby.
Okay.
So
Do you have some to read from that one?
I do, and
Go for it.
he's blackmailing her. So that's what this is. This is where
okay.
he's blackmailing
He's
her.
blackmailing her. Okay, good.
Okay, Jordan was feeling on top of the world when she rolled the Jeep to the stop in front of her house. The sun was dipping toward the west. God was in control. God and Ethel. She had just upped her purchase on the bed when the phone rang. Hello, Bunny? Jordan felt faint with rage. There's no Bunny here, she hissed. There's nobody here that's remotely interested in talking to you. Now get the hell out of my life. I don't think so. There's no reason why we can't continue our little late-night gets-togethers. He grunted. I think you enjoy him as much as I do. You're crazy, Jordan shouted. Midnight, he snapped. Our place. The line went dead. Time crept forward. The hornets inside Janet's head buzzed louder. At 11:45, she went to the bookshelf in the nursery and retrieved the oilcloth-wrapped weapon that was hidden behind War and Peace. With a steady hand, she checked the cylinder. It had a full round. She dropped the gun into her tote bag and turned to the crib and the sleeping infant. I make you this promise, baby boy. Tonight will be the last time I will ever leave you alone again. Moments later, her hands clenched the steering wheel as she maneuvered the rutted logging road. She parked in front of the dark shack and cut the headlights. The moonless sky was perfect to cover unearthly deeds. Owls hooted in the trees. Jordan's steps fell silent upon the leaf-padded ground as she walked to the door. It was open a half an inch or so. The flame from the lantern lighted the crack. She pushed the door open with the toe of her shoe and walked in. He was sitting at the table facing the front. Behind him, the back door was partway open. She stood for a second, glaring at him with more hate than she ever thought she could have for another human being. Waiting for him to speak, she eased open the zipper of the tote bag and reached inside. Her hand closed around the handle of the pistol. She stepped in his direction. I'm here, she said. Your Bunny's come to see you like you knew I would. She lifted the gun. But the game is over. This is the last time. His eyes stared at her in the flickering light. He never once blinked, not even when she pointed the gun. Say something, damn you, she hissed and stepped nearer. Don't just sit there like the rotten lowlife you are. Her fist slammed down on the table. His head thudded to his chest and fell forward, striking the rough wooden slats. A knife handle protruded from between his shoulder blades. Jordan fought back the giggle. She would have killed him. She knew that for certain, but somebody had denied her the privilege. She whirled around and headed back out the door. There would be no more killing tonight.
Wow, that's chilling.
He was the blackmailer.
Wow.
And I deliberately left out his name because if anybody reads the book, they don't need to know who he is until she sees him in the mining shack or in the logger shack.
Right. And this is Mary Ann Artrip reading from her book. What's the title of it again?
Surrey Square.
Okay. Now, how many books have you written?
I've written four novels and one book of short stories.
4 novels and 1 book of short stories.
And my last novel has just been. It came out at the end of 2013. It's Rooney Boone.
Rooney Boone.
That's the girl's name.
Oh, that's a woman. Girl. Okay, woman.
The 12-year-old girl.
Because I saw that and saw it on the internet, and I thought it was Ronnie, but it's Rooney.
It's Rooney, and somebody asked her on the school bus if she was kin to Daniel because her last name was Boone, and she says, "Well, my granny always said we were, but you can't believe nothing she says."
Well, Daniel's a good person, to name to throw around these parts because he was a trailblazer. Except Mary Ann, if you're from around Salisbury, because he left there owing some people some money. And
really?
Yeah, but his parents, they're buried down there, right on the outskirts of Salisbury, in a graveyard not very far from McDonald's, which I always thought that was kind of ironic.
I've been to Salisbury.
Yeah, and it's just on the outside. I'm sorry, Moxville. But he spent time in Salisbury. But Boone is interesting. We talked the other day. You and I were talking about Robert Morgan. Robert Morgan has a really good book out on Daniel Boone. And
then he also wrote Gat Creek.
Oh, yes. Yeah, that was an Oprah book.
I read, I think that was an Oprah selection, and I read it, and he wrote it from the viewpoint of a woman having and she had a baby, and I just really, really enjoyed it.
All right, now I interrupt you. Talk a little bit about Rooney Boone, your latest book.
Rooney Boone this is the only book that I've ever done that is set in the Appalachians. She's a holler girl. She lives up in one of the hollers. Her mother abandoned her.
What does that mean, a holler girl?
Up in the hollows.
Okay. Yeah, she lives in, a lot of people lived up on the side of the mountain and on the mountain, and she lived down in the holler, in the valley, right?
The hollers ran up the mountains.
Okay.
It was I think somebody came to here one time and decided they were going to do right about this area, and they called the hollers canyons. Well, they're not canyons, they're hollers.
Okay.
But anyway, it's set in the Appalachians. She's 12 years old. Her father has just been killed in the mines, and her mother, for some reason or other, abandoned her and left her in the hospital because she was like a preemie when she was born, and she didn't know what happened to her mother. Her grandparents didn't want to fool with her, so they put her in reform school.
Wow.
And they brought her home.
What's a reform school, Mary Ann? A lot of people, growing up, my mother used to tell me when she would get upset with me, and I didn't know what a reform school was. You remember that around the mountains? You know what I'm talking about. And your parents would say, "I'm going to put you in a reform school."
Yeah.
And I'm like,
a lot of kids did go to reform school. Of course, now they just get out and run the streets, and nobody pays any attention.
So it was for juvenile delinquents, right?
Yeah, truants.
All right. Well, I interrupt you again. Go ahead now and talk about.
So anyway, she begs her grandmother not to send her. They brought her home for Christmas. This is in the '60s. Kennedy has just been assassinated, or they're still talking about it. It's still fresh in the news, and she's begging her grandparents not to send her back to the reform school. She says, "Gran, it's a crazy house. The people there are Looney Tunes. Please don't make me go back." And Grandmother says, "Yes, you're going back." And she said, "Well, I promise you, if you make me go back, I will run away."
Wow. And do you have a little bit of passage to read from? We're watching the clock here, and my excellent producers, Richard Graves and Evan. But do you have a little bit to read from that one?
Well, I don't have the book in here.
That's all right. Well, so do you have anything else that you want to? I'm going to ask you some more questions. Do you have anything else you want to share with us reading-wise today? Rooney.
If we could talk a little bit more about Rooney Boone.
Okay.
It was. Here I go, stuttering. But Rooney.
Well, slow down just a little bit.
Okay. Rooney Boone. She runs away in a snowstorm, and she ends up. She hitches a ride, and she's gone a pretty good ways from the reform school, but she still doesn't think she's gone far enough that she's safe. But she collapses on this back porch in this small town, and the lady comes out to throw the mop water out into the yard, and she sees Rooney there, and the lady that throws out the mop water is the cook for the boarding house, and she is a black lady. Back then, they were colored.
Okay, now I want to ask you a little bit about the writing process as we watch the clock here. You were using dialect in this book, and how did you find that? Was it difficult to use?
It was the hardest thing I ever done. I would never recommend anybody do it because it's you have to hear the rhythm in your head, and then you have to spell a lot of the words phonetically, and of course spell check just goes crazy on you, and it's really hard. But this lady her name was Mimosa. She was the cook for the boarding house, and she was really the glue that held the book together, because she was a classy lady, even though she was a cook in a boarding house.
Where can we find a copy of your book?
And I was going to give my website, from my website, or from Amazon, or Barnes and Noble, or.
So your website is? Do you have it handy there?
It's just www.MaryAnnArtrip.com.
And they can...
and you can click on the covers. If you go to my book link, you can click on any of the covers and read the first chapter of every book.
Wow. I know you have a very good website. And I
do. I'm real proud of my website. Sylvia Nichols helped me build it.
I remember you put one of my poems on your website there. Wild Bill.
Also, I have lots and lots of pictures of all of our groups, and the group from Zazzy's, and a lot of them have passed away, and Marilyn McComas, before she moved away, and so I've got some really good pictures on there. So I've got a good website.
Yeah, we used to read down at the library too in Abingdon, and we're talking too.
And if you go to my links page, which is really just links to other sites, but there is a big faded picture of all of us in the background as the wallpaper, and that's at the library, and it's all of us, that you and me and Dr. Sam and Patrice and Carol, and the whole gang, and Joan, and the whole gang of us. So I've got some really good pictures.
Now, in summary here, advice then, and we've touched on this, your advice for people getting very quickly, being your advice for getting started in writing and then getting published. Well, you certainly would join a writers group, right?
Oh, absolutely, because they can be lifesavers.
And then how do you get published? I
had an agent, and I had two small publishers, and they are, I cannot say too much good stuff about small publishers. The small publishers will call you. They'll pick up the phone and call you and talk to you. But they have. They are up against such odds that most of them end up going bankrupt.
Okay, so
they can't make it. So I had two great publishers, and they both went bankrupt. And I was at the age where it wasn't so important to me to try to find another publisher or another agent. I wanted to do it to suit myself.
So you're self-published now, correct?
And that was when Lightning Source had sort of made its heyday.
Okay.
And they were the best thing around at the time was Lightning Source. Since then, we've come out. They've come out with Create Space, which is probably I can't say they're better than Lightning Source. I think maybe they may be a little bit cheaper. But I just loved working with Lightning Source. So that way you can do your books exactly the way you want them, and they're not ready till you say they're ready.
All right. Mary Ann, any parting words here as we wrap up Poets and Writers today? WEHC 90.7 coming to you from the beautiful Emory and Henry College campus. Any parting words for us?
I was on, called it the campus up there when we did the thing for the American chestnut tree, and I did a presentation for that. So, that's a beautiful little college.
All right. I want to thank you for being on today, and thank you for sharing part of your life and some of your books with us. So it's always good to talk with you, Mary Ann Artrip, and thank you for being with us today. This is Henry McCarthy saying I'm going out to write a poem and watch the children play. Do not wait up for me. And thanks again, Mary Ann, for being on the show.
Thank you, Henry. Bye-bye.